Dillian Whyte versus Moses Itauma could go very, very wrong. The fight's just been confirmed, and I view this fight as a high-risk one for both men, but for very different reasons. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down how we've ended up with this fight being made, why both men will actually be relishing the opportunity to fight one another, and giving you my initial thoughts on how I think this fight might play out. I think there's a really great story here. I think this is an excellent fight, so stick with me to the end of this video, guys, as I take a deep dive into Moses Itauma versus Dillian Whyte. Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. Well, this fight has been made, and it's one I'm actually very excited about. Dillian Whyte and Moses Itauma are going to meet in a heavyweight clash in August in Saudi Arabia. Straight off the bat, I'm going to say that it's a little bit of a shame that while Moses is still building his fan base in the UK, that he's not fighting there full-time, as consistently as you might want. But at the same time, when you're someone who's young like Moses, and you need to push yourself quickly to the top, you do need financial backing, and we know that the Saudis provide that. So I don't really have any complaints about the fight being in Saudi Arabia. I just think that if you want to benefit from the fan bases of each country supporting their fighters, you do need to have that UK base, and I think Moses will need to build that. But just the mere fact that he's fighting such a famous fighter in the UK as Dillian Whyte might just provide that push. So I guess to begin this video, where I really want to begin is by talking about where we are for both men. How has each man ended up at this point, and why has this decision come about for them to actually take on each other in the ring? Because, you know, it's not the most obvious fight, I don't think. Now that it's been made, I kind of step back and go, actually, that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think people were saying, oh, you know, Dillian Whyte, that's the guy Moses Itauma should fight. I don't think that's the opponent most people were picking out for him. Just before I jump in, guys, don't forget to bang a like on this video if you do indeed like it. Don't forget to subscribe to A Guy Called Henry if you're new, or if you're someone who's been watching for a while and you haven't hit the button yet. It really means a lot to me. It would really help to support the channel. And get your comments in the comment section below. Tell me, I genuinely want to know from people, do you like this fight? And who do you think is going to win? Do you think that Dillian Whyte might actually be able to do something to Moses Itauma here? Or do you think that Moses Itauma is just going to run through Dillian Whyte? So to begin, I guess we should talk about Dillian Whyte first, because I think he's kind of been in the wilderness a little bit. We've not been speaking about him a huge amount recently, and it's with good reason. He's not been in a particularly competitive fight in quite a while. I think where I want to jump in on Dillian Whyte's career is when he lost to Tyson Fury back in 2022. You know, he was at Wembley Stadium. It was the pinnacle moment for him. He was finally fighting for that WBC world title. He had a series of decent wins at world level before getting knocked out by Povetkin in fight camp, if you guys remember that, during COVID. He then got his revenge over Povetkin, and finally, after that long storied battle he had with the WBC to get his mandatory shot, he got in the ring with Fury, but unfortunately, he got knocked out. And I think a narrative that we definitely need to discuss later in this video is Dillian Whyte's susceptibility to the uppercut, because we've seen him knocked out like that, I think, off the top of my head, 3 times now in his career. The Anthony Joshua fight for the British title, the first Povetkin fight, that was one of the most beautiful uppercuts I've ever seen. And again, the Tyson Fury fight, as soon as Fury landed an uppercut on Dillian Whyte's chin, it was good night. But as soon as Whyte got that fight against Fury, ultimately he was kind of outclassed, to be honest with you. And look, Dillian Whyte is a warrior, he's a battler. Have I ever seen him as an elite level heavyweight? Probably not. But there was definitely a period of time where I think you would have said he was for sure top 10, maybe even top 5. And I guess part of this video is trying to figure out where do I actually think Dillian Whyte is right now in terms of his ability. But Whyte came back from that fight with a close-fought win over Jermaine Franklin that a lot of people actually thought he lost after the Fury fight. And then in 2023, he was supposed to have a fight against Anthony Joshua. You know, we've always talked about those two meeting again in the ring, such is their rivalry, such was, you know, the personal nature of their clash when they fought for that British title. But Dillian Whyte failed a VADA drug test. Now, I don't know if there was an official sentencing, an official ban for that. It was maybe a silent ban, because we didn't see him in the ring again until March 2024. So by that time, he hadn't fought since November 2022, which is quite a long period. And sometimes they backdate these bans, so I don't really know what was going on there. Unfortunately, Dillian Whyte does have a bit of a history with testing for banned substances. I think there's 3 times in his career he's failed a test. Oftentimes, these have been explained away by contamination or whatever else. I think he's only had 2 bans out of the 3, but that is definitely something that's been a bit of a mark against Dillian Whyte's name throughout his career, is the fact that he has not always been a clean athlete. And that brings us to, you know, his most recent form, his 2 fights that came last year. He had one against Christian Hamer in March 2024. He won by TKO, but he looked pretty sloppy, to be honest with you. And Hamer at that point, you know, he had some decent fights in his career, Hamer, but I mean, nothing left, to be fair. And then the fight that brings us to where we are today, and probably the reason that I think that Moses Itauma will be very comfortable going into this fight and happy with this fight, was his TKO win against one Ebenezer Tete. In the 7th round, he TKO'd him, but we will talk about that fight a bit more. But safe to say that it was not a good performance, and it was actually a bit of a war against a guy who did not look like a professional athlete. Let me put it that way. Now, Moses Itauma, on the other hand, is experiencing what you would describe as a meteoric rise right now. I mean, he really is the talk of the town. He's super hyped up, and he's carving through his opponents like a hot knife through butter, as people like to say in the sporting world. It's a lovely analogy, but it's true. You know, he's been untroubled so far. He's not really taken a clean punch, and offensively, he looks absolutely fantastic. He's so fast, so sharp, just looked brilliant. So, you know, he's only 20 years old, or maybe he's 21 now, but as we all know, he had his pro debut at 18. I think in 2023, he had about 7 wins by way of knockout. Late 23, he switches trainers from his amateur coach to Ben Davison. And it's obviously a really interesting matchup between him and Ben, link up between him and Ben, I should say. Ben, obviously, the talk of the town at the minute with some of the fighters that he has. We saw the Fabio Wardley fight recently. And actually, just as a side note before I continue on with this one, something that I really hate, and I'd love to know what you guys think about this, is when you have one trainer who has multiple heavyweights in his stable, because it reduces the amount of matchups that can be made in the division. Like, one that really always bothered me was Tyson Fury and Joseph Parker being in the same camp. And they've always said they'll never fight each other, but why would I not want to see Tyson Fury against Joseph Parker? They're 2 of the top 5 heavyweights in the world right now. It's honestly frustrating that fighters would make allegiances with guys who I want to see them fight. And it's a similar thing in Davison's gym right now. They've got Joshua, they've got Wardley, and they've got Itauma. I can see a world in which all 3 of those guys would fight each other in the near future. It's frustrating because we don't know which way the heavyweight division is going to go. We just have no idea. The way that things play out, matchups can come out of the blue. And actually, I think that, I never would have thought Wardley was going to fight Justice Hooney, but it created a great fight because, you got one guy who's a super slick, fantastic boxer, Wardley, who is a puncher, who is looking to time you and set things up. I want as many options and variety of options for matchups as possible. So I don't know what's going to happen in that stable. I don't know if one guy's going to have to leave or 2 guys are going to have to leave. I think that if I'm Ben Davison, I'm probably backing the youngest, most talented horse in the race right now, which is Itauma. Wardley Itauma is a very realistic fight in the next couple of years. Like, that would not surprise me to see that fight. So going to early May 24, I mean, it really has, it's the last year, really, the last year and a half that's been significant for Itauma in getting his name out there because of the style of his wins. But he had that Mezentsev fight. It was in May 2024 in Saudi Arabia. And this was the first fight where, even though Mezentsev is not a particularly large heavyweight, not a particularly formidable opponent, it's just the way that Itauma has been going about his business. Because yes, these guys can't really match him, but in that Mezentsev fight, we saw the way he created angles on the back foot. He just looked super slick, super powerful. Mezentsev's not a bad boxer. He's just not really a significant force physically. And he got absolutely blown away at the end of it. July 24 was the first time that Moses Itauma was in there with a recognizable name in Marius Wack. Now, I don't think Marius Wack's really got anything left, but the way that Itauma just beat him so easily, so comfortably, and the style of the finish was really, really great to see. So I guess this is the first time you would describe him as a gatekeeper. I would say most fights since then have kind of been a step down. Maybe not Dempsey McKean, who he actually fought after this, but that was a first-round knockout. Again, the way that we saw Itauma set up the shots to the head with the feint to the body, that body jab, he likes to establish it. We won't get into a style breakdown right now. I've actually done that already. If you want to check that out on my channel, I can put the link in the comments or in the description or something like that. I've done the style breakdown. I won't get into that right now. But he beat Dempsey McKean with that first-round knockout. And then the one we've just seen recently in May 25, the second-round TKO of Mike Balogun in Glasgow was absolutely startling. And that brings us to the present day for each of these men. We've got one guy, as I say, he's really on the come up. He's moving fast. And we've got another guy who's 37 years old, and he's right at the end. And his next couple of career moves are essential. That's why for both guys, there's huge risk. One guy, you might be about to absolutely ruin his trajectory. The other guy, you might be about to finish his career. So it's a high risk, high reward fight for both of them. But let's get into specifically why this is a high risk fight for Dillian Whyte. And like I just said, he's 37 years old, obviously past his prime. But how much has he slowed down? What sort of chance does he have physically in there of actually winning this fight? I think for me, the biggest risk comes for Dillian Whyte to his health. Because I know that sounds dramatic, but if he doesn't have enough left, then he's going to be in trouble. And based on what I saw in there against Ebenezer Tete, and you'll see in the highlights on screen now, Dillian Whyte was in an absolute war with a guy who had absolutely no business being in there with the caliber of a fighter that Whyte is. The caliber of opponent Whyte's faced previously and beaten, the level that Whyte has fought at, that should not have been a significant contest. That shouldn't have been close, but it was. It was a scrap. And there were moments where I thought Whyte was genuinely in trouble. So I'm extremely concerned about where Dillian Whyte actually is at physically right now. To counter that, there's arguments that it's just at this point, having fought who he's fought, he might not be able to get up for a fight like that. So maybe Dillian Whyte didn't train appropriately. Also, the ring rust, he'd been out the ring for a significant amount of time, even before that Hammer fight, which didn't go very long. He's just not had high-level, consistent opposition and consistent fights over the last few years. And that's been a massive issue for him. And indeed, coming into this one, he was supposed to fight in June on the undercard of Fabio Wardley, who is Dillian Whyte's fighter. In terms of management, Dillian Whyte discovered him. I think he still manages him as well. But they pulled him from that because of the opportunity that came up in August. But I'm sure if you're Dillian Whyte, what I find a little strange about that is surely you would have wanted to fight on that card to get a little warm-up before. But then I guess he must be getting paid a lot because you don't want to take a risk. You don't want to risk losing that fight with Itauma. And I guess sticking on that theme of, what's left for Whyte, that he's taken significant KO losses throughout his career. So I don't think there's a huge risk to him in terms of reputation. But then so I say that on the one hand, but then on the other hand, you could argue that there very much is, because at least when he's lost before, it's been against world level operators, guys who are at the top table already. Anthony Joshua, who at the time it was British level, but we could see they were both a bit green, and it's understandable. AJ was the talk of the town back then. So Anthony Joshua, Povetkin, Tyson Fury, these are all guys who stopped him. And if he was to get stopped by a Moses Itauma, then it kind of signals the end. The end is here. And I don't know how you could rebuild after that. I don't think you can rebuild after that. So if he loses to someone who is a baby in terms of heavyweight boxing, in terms of life, it's probably the end. And that is a harsh reality for Dillian Whyte that I'm sure he has accepted moving into this one. I think one thing I'll say about Dillian Whyte is I do believe him to be quite a realistic individual. But I guess what I would say is that, did he have to fight Moses Itauma? Dillian Whyte's still got quite a big name. And I guess that kind of indicates to me that he's probably looked at the top 10. He's thought, if I'm going to have one last crack, what's the fastest way to the top? Well, I'm not sure if I can beat any of these top-level experienced guys right now, but Moses Itauma, he's green, he's new. Maybe I can. So the risk for him actually is, it's a high risk, high reward. We'll talk a bit more about the reward in a minute, but I think the risk for him really is, if he hasn't got enough left, it's a risk to his health. And it depends on the manner if he loses, but if he loses badly, he's done. There's no more fights, there's no more paydays. Whereas if he had taken somebody who was a bit more established at the top, which I reckon he probably could have got as a voluntary somewhere in there, he probably still could have fought a Moses Itauma for similar money. So it's an interesting one. But moving on to Moses Itauma, what is the risk for him? Because at the end of the day, this is a calculated risk. You are putting him in there with someone who is more experienced, who's fought at the higher level and has been in the boxing game for a long time. So what are the risks here for Moses Itauma? Well, he's obviously very young. He's not fought particularly high-level opposition, and he's never been past round 6. And he's in there with someone in Dillian Whyte who has all that veteran experience. He knows his way around the boxing ring, and he's going to know tips and tricks that Itauma may not have seen before. Now, I know you can spar, and he's been doing that for a long time. He's been around gyms for a long time, but you don't really know until you actually know, if that makes sense. Until you're actually in the ring, you're actually competing at the highest level. And I guess the calculated risk is Whyte the right guy to take that first step? And also the risk is, once you take that first step, there isn't any going back. That's the thing. That's the thing about boxing. Once you step up, you can't really start stepping down again. And whilst Whyte is unquestionably faded, we don't know for sure how much he's faded. It might just be an issue of it might have been an issue of sharpness in some of these fights. But that's a calculated thing. It probably wasn't just that. We know he is faded. We know he is deteriorated. But when you put him in there with an actual live dog, a live opponent, it may bring something out of him that we've not seen in a while. And that, I guess, is the riskiest thing about it, is a top-level Dillian Whyte would give Itauma some serious troubles. But I guess there is a question to try and answer, which is, could this Itauma beat the best Whyte? I mean, we'll maybe talk about that at the end of the video, but it's something to consider. But everyone's been talking about Moses Itauma's chin. He hasn't been chin-checked. He hasn't been tested. He's not been hit clean. And a lot of people refer to his brother Carol, who, as soon as he stepped up, he got iced, basically. He showed he had no chin. And now there's all this debate raging around that Moses Itauma doesn't have a chin. I hope we can find out in this fight. And the risk is that Dillian Whyte is a pretty good puncher. If he does land clean on you, he's a big man, he's a strong man. It will definitely test Itauma if he gets hit. It's a big if, though, as to whether or not Dillian Whyte will be the guy to test him. So when he's so young, when you could just move him at a steady pace, keep him fighting, the level of Mike Balogun, why have they done this now? Well, I think that the big test that he can benefit from is the mental side of things. I think the risk actually might even be to him is the mental game. If Dillian Whyte can put the pressure on him and get inside his head, we might see something from Moses Itauma we've not seen so far. We might just need it to be stuck on Itauma a little bit. But I think this is all about experience for Itauma. I think this is happening right now because they've looked at what Dillian Whyte's done recently. They've said, we don't know how much he's got left, but also he has enough left that he'll show a bit more than some of the guys he's been in there with so far. Also, Dillian can put him through the ringer in terms of the mental game and the build-up. It'll be a high-pressure, high-profile fight, something that's good for every fighter to go through as early as possible. And I guess the question with Moses Itauma is, how do you ensure that he gets through his career smoothly and well? Well, he needs more commercial power. And I think this is an opportunity right now where Saudi Arabia exists in terms of their interest in boxing. They're willing to put the money on the table. So it's possible for this to happen. I don't think at any other time in the sport would you have seen Dillian Whyte stepping in the ring with Itauma. But I think this is a very clear investment from Itauma's handlers to say, we think this guy's good enough. We think it's worth maybe losing a bit of money on this one to buy a more commercial pulling power for the future. I believe that's why it's happening right now. Whyte's name still sells. You know, he's won his last couple of fights. Before he loses again, before he's done in the sport, let's cash in. Let's get some of this guy's name. Let's put it on Itauma. That's what they're doing here. That's the whole purpose of this. But also, he will give Itauma a bit more experience. And conversely, the opportunity for Dillian Whyte here is, it's a big payday. I'm sure he's getting paid handsomely for this fight. He's not ranked in any of the top 10 of the governing bodies in the heavyweight division. So he's not going to get a title shot. And I'm absolutely certain that Whyte knows how hard this fight is going to be. He's actually got a very good eye for talent. As I said earlier, he's the one who found Fabio Wardley from absolutely nowhere, from the white collar scene. So we know that Whyte more than likely has a very good awareness of just what a difficult challenge this is in front of him. But the opportunity here is that it's a chance for career resurrection. He will get another payday if he wins this fight. Plus, if you're going to beat Itauma, now's the time to do it. Get him while he's still green. I think Whyte knows how good this guy is, and if he waits any longer, I don't know if he has a chance of beating him. He may not have any chance of beating him already, but it's going to get even worse the longer that we wait. So the risk for Whyte, I guess it's minimal. You know, as a boxer, you don't really think about your health that much. He's not going to be worried about that. Yes, a little mark on your legacy, but to be honest, with what this guy is going to go on and achieve, I think long-term it won't impact Whyte's legacy at all. And it is an opportunity to return to the top. And a further point I want to make about the opportunity for Itauma is that I think this is a chance for him to go in there and box to a very, very disciplined game plan. You know, go in there for 6 rounds, make absolutely no mistakes, beat up Dillian Whyte, stick behind your jab, or do whatever it is you need to do. Show that you're defensively very, very astute and sound, and basically just systematically break down Dillian Whyte and then eventually take him out. Get behind your jab, do what you need to do, have a high guard, whatever it is, but box to a safe, disciplined game plan and get yourself ready for when you do get into those bigger fights, because you can't just be going in there all guns blazing when you get to the top level. So I think it's a chance for him to really test himself and try a few things out, but ultimately show a bit more discipline than maybe he has in some of his previous fights. Not to say that he's been in trouble in any of them, but I think he has been quite aggressive, and I think that he could benefit from taking a few rounds in this one and taking his time to actually implement a plan to break Whyte down. That said, I also wouldn't be massively surprised if he just goes in there and tries to blow him out, because you don't get paid for overtime in boxing, right? I guess the question is, in terms of the reward for Itauma, would this prove he's the real deal? I think for me, depending on the manner of his victory, it would show he's at a certain level, but it doesn't provide evidence yet that he's at the top table because of where Dillian Whyte is at in his career. But it is a potential opportunity for everything to go wrong and for everything to be derailed. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is, right now, how do I view this one going? Well, I said earlier that everybody's talking about the Dillian Whyte uppercut susceptibility, the fact that, you know, he's been knocked out 3 times in his career, all by uppercuts. All Itauma's got to do is land that uppercut and it's lights out. Well, that may be true, but I also don't think it's as straightforward as that, and I do think this is an interesting chess match because Dillian Whyte himself knows that that's a problem. He also knows that Itauma's likely going to try and land it, so you can use that as an opportunity for counter-punching, for counter shots. And I think for Itauma, it's about taking your time, being patient, and finding a way to set up that uppercut. You know, finding your opportunity to set up that uppercut. It's an interesting experience for a fighter to go into a fight where everybody knows what the weakness is, and still be able to mask the fact that that's what you're going to do. That is actually massively invaluable, and it'll be very interesting to see how Davison decides he should go about doing that. But he doesn't necessarily need to do it via the uppercut. It's just that we all know that that's the obvious weakness. For Dillian Whyte, everybody's always talked about the check left hook. The speed of the left hook that Dillian Whyte has always been there. It didn't really look like it was there anymore against Tete, but maybe it'll be back in this fight. So that's his main weapon. That's the thing everybody knows you've got to look out for with Dillian Whyte. And again, it's an interesting tactical piece that both of them will be able to play around with. I think for me, the biggest factor that no one's really speaking about at the minute is the Dillian Whyte jab, and the fact that he has actually a decent jab, Dillian Whyte, and I think that will be an interesting thing to see how Itauma deals with that lead hand of Dillian Whyte. But overall, right now, I can't look past Itauma for the win. I'm not making my official prediction. I will do some tactical breakdowns and stuff, I'm sure, before this fight. I want to look at how they seem psychologically in the build-up and in the press conferences and whatnot. But ultimately, it's the youth and the speed of Itauma that I think will probably be too much for Dillian Whyte. It might be as simple as this guy is just too young and too fresh, and you've had one too many wars, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 too many wars at this point. So right now, it's hard to look past Itauma, but I definitely want to look at a bit more of the nuance and tactical detail before this fight comes to see if I think there is any way for Dillian Whyte to win this one. But guys, thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please bang a like on it. It really helps to support the channel. Please subscribe if you're new or if you've been watching for a little while. And I would love it if you'd comment below. I'd love to know what you think about this fight because it is probably, I mean, it's one of the most exciting heavyweight fights this year. It's an interesting one for sure. And I think we're all just excited to see more of Moses Itauma at this point. But also, it is interesting to see what Dillian Whyte has left. There may be more in the tank than we think. And also, I will say this, Dillian Whyte always goes to the well. It's just that he might come up dry this time. But whatever happens, he won't pass up the opportunity to turn this into a war. Thanks for watching this all the way to the end, guys, and as I always say, on to the next one.